Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Library. Wherever you are in the world, and whatever time it is as you press play, we're honored to keep you company as you drift into rest. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to settle in. Feel the warmth of your blanket, the stillness around you, and the space you've made to simply let go. If you enjoy this experience, we invite you to subscribe to the Sleep Library. We create gentle, slow, and calming stories to help you sleep. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. And in the comments below, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Your words help us build a global, restful little community. One quiet listener at a time. Now, if you're ready, let's travel back to a time not often remembered, to a village where the wind listened and whispered back. Before there were maps, there were memories, in the heart of what is now northern France, cradled in the soft hills where fog lingers and rivers hum in secret. There once stood a village not found in any book or scroll. The people who lived nearby called it Acorsevent, not for any nobleman or patron saint, but for the way the wind moved through the trees. It was said that if you stood at the edge of the village at dawn and listened closely, the wind would whisper, and if you whispered back, the wind would remember. Acorsevent had no stone gates, no flags, no watchful nights. Just 41 homes, a thatched roof chapel with bells that only rang on the first snowfall, and a tiny square where elder women traded honey, dried sage, and stories that felt older than the ground they stood on. Life moved slowly there, like breath on a winter window pane. Chickens wandered freely. The snow came gently and stayed too long. Children played by the edge of the stream, which turned silver in the moonlight and was believed to have no bottom. There was no lord who ruled Acorsevent. Only Father Etienne, a kind man with a soft voice and parchment-colored hands. He wrote everything down, the dates of every birth, every snowfall, every unusual dream told to him in confidence. In the evenings, people gathered in the chapel, not for prayer, but for listening. Stories were told, candles were lit, and the old ones passed on things they'd heard from their own grandparents, like the tale of the boy who could read the stars, or the woman who spoke to animals before they fled the forest for good. But none of them imagined they were being forgotten. Not yet, not then. And so, in the year 1348, a year most known for shadows and sickness, life in Acorsevent began to shift. But not with terror, with silence, with birds vanishing, with the air growing still, with dreams that all seemed to end the same way, a whisper in the dark, saying only, "Remember me." In most places, winter begins with an event, a storm, a gust, a sudden flurry that transforms the world overnight. But in Acorsevent, it came as a suggestion, the kind that drifted in slowly, gently reshaping everything until even the sunlight looked colder. It started with the bells. Every autumn, the chapel bell would ring on the last full moon before winter, a tradition passed down without any explanation. No one knew when it began or why, only that it felt wrong to let the season change without the sound. This year, it didn't ring. Father Etienne, who had never missed the ritual in 30 years, simply forgot. He said he didn't feel the time had come yet, said the moon didn't look right, but others noticed the shift. The trees seemed quieter. The stream, once so lively and full of chatter, had slowed to a murmur, and the animals, the foxes, the birds, the deer, began to vanish from sight earlier than usual, as if called elsewhere. In late October, All Wheat, the village seamstress, closed her shop 2 weeks early. She said the cloths were not taking dye as they used to, that even the color had grown tired. She gave away her remaining fabrics to the children, telling them to use the scraps as flags or wings. In early November, the inn served its final meal of the year, a pumpkin and barley stew. No travelers had come through a Korsavant in months. No letters, no news. People stopped asking questions. They simply started preparing, but they prepared differently this year. Fewer candles were made. Bread was baked without sharing. Chairs were left empty on purpose, not in mourning, but as if expecting someone or something to sit. There was one tradition everyone kept, the winter table. Each household placed a wooden table outside their home, beneath a lantern, and every night in December something was left on it. A slice of bread, a folded note, a dried flower, a ribbon. Sometimes just a single stone. It was never explained. It was simply done. Children believed the wind came to collect the offerings and bring them to the trees, where the forest spirits held council during the cold months. Elders said it was a way to remember those who had left at Korsavant and never returned. But Father Etienne once wrote in his journal, "Perhaps we do not know what we are honoring, but we honor it all the same. That is enough." Among the quietest of the villagers was Lucien, a boy of 10, who rarely spoke, but always watched. Lucien had a habit of waking before the rest of the village. He'd sit at the edge of the forest, facing east, and wait for the sky to shift. He said he could hear the clouds moving, said he could see things inside the snow before it fell. His mother, Mireille, was a candle maker. His father, long gone, not dead, not missing, just gone, had walked into the woods 6 winters before and never returned. No one searched, not out of cruelty, but because they knew he wasn't lost. Lucien spoke only to the wind. He wrote notes, tiny ones, and tucked them into the bark of a particular birch tree. When asked what he wrote, he simply said, "Thank yous." On the 3rd week of December, a fog settled over Korsavant and did not lift. Day after day, the world remained dim and blurred, as if the village had drifted under water. People moved more slowly. Doors creaked louder. The forest, once a constant presence, vanished into a pale wall of gray. A dog barked one night, once sharply, and was never seen again. A man named Gerard claimed he saw a figure standing in the bell tower at dawn, though no one had been there for days. He described it not as frightening, but out of place, like a word spoken in the wrong language. Father Etienne said nothing, only stared at the fog and murmured something about the veil thinning. The village fires burned, but produced no smoke. No one noticed at first. After all, the homes were warm, the flames alive. But smoke meant signal. It meant life. It meant the sky knew you were there. The children noticed before the adults. Lucien asked his mother, "Will the wind forget us if we don't send smoke?" She didn't answer, but that night she left a candle on the winter table, unlit. By the final days before solstice, something strange happened. People began to sleep longer, not just at night, but during the day. At first it was seen as a blessing, a time to rest, to dream. But then entire households slept through mornings. Meals went uncooked, letters unread. Fires dwindled, and no one noticed the cold. And still, no snow. Only the fog, only the wind, only the waiting. Lucien continued to leave his notes in the trees. Now others joined him. By December 21st, over 24 messages had been tucked into bark, weighted under stones, or hung from the branches of the old birch like paper leaves. One note read, "I do not ask to be remembered forever, only long enough for the snow to fall." On the evening of the solstice, Father Etienne opened the chapel doors and invited the villagers to come, not for prayer, but for stillness. He lit 12 candles, opened every window, and placed one object on each pew: a book, a child's toy, a spool of thread, a carved spoon, a handful of dried flowers. He asked no one to speak. They sat in silence as the fog drifted in, soft as breath. And then, finally, the first snow began to fall, not as a storm, not as a flurry, but as a hush, a slow cascade of white that seemed to come not from the sky, but from the stillness itself. And in that moment Corsican felt outside of time, like a memory no longer anchored to history, only to feeling, a quiet village where sleep came gently, and winter at last arrived. After the first snow fell on a Corsican, something shifted, not in any dramatic way, not in sound or color or speech, but in feeling. It was as if the entire village exhaled, as if it had been holding its breath for a season too long, and only now remembered how to let go. The fog remained soft as ever. The snow came gently each day, piling no higher than a child's boot, yet always falling, always whispering down from an unseen sky. And with it came a kind of quiet not even winter had known before. It was during this stillness that the letters began to appear. The first letter, it was Lucien, of course, who started it, though he would never admit that. On the morning of January 3rd, tucked beneath the chapel's doorstep was a folded piece of thick paper. Not parchment, not bound, just paper creased carefully, sealed with melted wax that had no insignia. On the outside was written, "To the wind who never forgot me." Inside, a single sentence: "I dreamed of the river last night. It was awake. I was not." Father Etienne found it before the frost could steal the ink. He didn't speak of it to anyone. He simply added it to a growing stack of notes he kept beside his bed, what others noticed. Within a week, small wooden boxes began to appear throughout the village. One was placed at the edge of the forest, carved from pale birchwood and lined with wool. Another sat at the mouth of the stream. A third beside the inn, beneath the shuttered sign that no longer swayed in windless air. Each box had a slot in the top, no lock and no owner, and each day more letters were placed inside. Some were folded tightly, as if holding in secrets, others loosely curled, like forgotten petals. They were not addressed to people, not even to the village. They were addressed to the wind. What did they say? Some letters were a single word. Others filled every corner of the page. But they were never confessions in the usual sense. Not sins, not regrets, not names. They were soft memories, small wishes, gentle observations that might have been lost forever if not given a page. One read, "My sister once taught me how to make tea from pine needles. I always meant to thank her. The needles are still here. She is not." Another, "I think I saw my father's coat on a stranger in a dream. It smelled like smoke and rosemary. I don't think he was sad." And another still, "Sometimes I imagine we are already gone, and these are the only words we ever truly meant." No one claimed the letters. No one responded. But every day new ones appeared, and every night the wind carried them somewhere unseen. On the 9th of January, a letter was found beneath the bench in the village square. It had no writing, only a pressed violet inside, dry and whole, and beside it a single silver thread curled in the shape of a sleeping eye. It was Mireille, Lucien's mother, who discovered it. She took it to the chapel, placed it beside the others, and wept for the first time in years, not from grief, but from something deeper, recognition, as if the letter reminded her of a dream she hadn't had yet, but would soon. There was one man in the village, Baston, who never wrote a letter. He had no family left. His home was the smallest in a Korsavant, a single room with a hearth, a chair, and a shelf lined with candle stubs he never lit. But Baston had a task. Every evening, just before night fell, he walked the village with a lantern, relighting the ones that had blown out during the day. He did not speak, but he hummed a tune no one else remembered. When asked why he never wrote to the wind, he simply smiled and said, "I keep its path clear. That is enough." By mid-January, Father Etienne had collected over 100 letters. He read each one, slowly, with reverence, as if they were sacred texts. Then, after reading, he placed them in a wooden chest behind the chapel altar. No fire, no burial. He believed the wind would come for them when it was ready. One night, as the wind howled louder than usual, he placed a new letter on the altar. It read, "If no one is left to remember the world, does the world remember itself?" He left it unsealed. In the morning it was gone. The chapel door remained locked. By late January something began to change. Not in the snow, not in the fog, in the wind itself. It began to sound different, not stronger, not colder, but more articulate. Some claimed it carried voices, not whispers, but fragments of words they half recognized. A child said the wind called her name. A baker said it sang a lullaby his grandmother used to hum. Lucien said he heard the sound of paper folding itself, again and again, far above the rooftops. And one night every letter in the forest box vanished, not taken, but lifted, scattered across the snow like ashes, leaving no tracks. That morning the snow tasted like honey. On the last night of January, Lucien placed a final note into the hollow of the birch tree. He wore his warmest scarf. He carried no candle. He stood in silence for nearly an hour before placing the letter inside. No one knows what it said, but the next morning the tree had bloomed, not with flowers, but with frost shaped like feathers, fanning out from its base like wings. Lucien didn't speak of it. He only smiled and said, "It's listening." That evening, for the first time in weeks, the entire village went to sleep at the same hour. All lights out, all fires banked, all voices quiet. Even Baston did not relight the lanterns. Even Father Etienne did not write in his journal. The wind passed through a Korsavant like a breath, slow, full, and warm. And in the darkness, someone or something tucked a folded note into each home. No one read them aloud, but those who woke the next morning said only this: "I remembered something I thought I'd lost." Not the creeping mist that dusts the fields in morning dew, but a thick and muffling gray veil that swallowed the chapel, the well, and even the bell tower. From the abbey's highest window, where I often write, I could scarcely see the sheep in the pasture. It is as if God has brushed his sleeve across the valley, and the world has fallen into a hush. I have begun to write again because the days stretch long and quiet, and even prayer feels thinner in these hours. There are fewer of us now. Brother Edric passed in his sleep last week, and no one has heard from Brother Thomas since midsummer. We heard no birds today, none at all. There's an unnatural silence perched atop the trees. Even the crows, so eager to announce death, have grown mute. I walked to the edge of the pine grove this morning and stood very still, waiting. Nothing. Only wind brushing the tops of bare branches and the faint echo of my own footsteps. Something is shifting. I received a letter, folded neatly and left upon the chapel altar. There were no footprints in the fresh snow, no signs of approach. Only the parchment, pale as ash, with delicate script. Do not look for us. We have become part of the wind. It bore no name. I recognized the hand, though. It was from Sister Elodie of the Weaving Village. She was among the last to deliver wool to our abbey before the frost came. I dreamt of a bell that does not ring. A great tower stood alone on the hill where the village once was, and I climbed its spiral stair. Each step echoed like distant thunder. At the top, I found the bell, vast and unmoving. Around it, wind circled, whispering prayers in languages I do not know. When I woke, my hands smelled of cold iron. I walked the southern path toward the village. The snow had formed patterns on the stone, spirals and branching lines like the veins of a leaf. It felt wrong to disturb them, so I walked slowly, watching each step. When I reached the first house, I found it empty. The hearth was warm. A bowl of barley stew sat uneaten on the table, frozen over. A child's doll sat upright by the door, its wooden eyes carved with care. They are gone. All of them, not buried, not taken. Simply gone. I have not lit a candle in 3 days. I write only by gray daylight. There are no voices in the halls, only my own, and I use it less and less. The sheep have gathered close to the abbey, though no one feeds them. They stare, they wait, as if they too are listening for something. I have taken to sleeping in the bell tower, high above the cloisters, where the wind sings its endless hymn. The snow fell upward today. I watched from the belfry as tiny crystals of white drifted not toward the earth, but skyward, as if called back to heaven. It lasted only a moment. Then silence again. I no longer expect sense from this world. I have begun to keep this journal not to record, but to anchor. Each word written keeps me tethered to the idea that I remain, that I still belong to a world that makes ink, parchment, and thought. Entry the 8th, January 6, 1349, the Feast of the Epiphany. In years past, the village children would sing outside the abbey walls. Their voices, bright, shrill, and imperfect, would echo off the stone like flocks of birds. I would offer them dried apples and bless their small palms. Today there is only snow on the steps. I knelt there alone, my breath rising in small clouds, and whispered the songs to myself. For a moment I thought I heard harmony, a second voice, faint and breathless, but it faded with the wind. Entry 9, February 2nd, 1349. Today I found tracks, not human. Tiny prints, delicate as ink strokes, moved in a perfect circle in the chapel nave. No starting point, no end, just a ring. I followed nothing and found no source. Yet I feel as if something had been watching, not malevolent, but curious, like the wind itself leaned in to read scripture over my shoulder. Entry X, February 14th, 1349. A year ago we held weddings in this season, quiet bindings before spring's planting. Today I wed only memory. I whispered the names of those gone into the open air, letting them drift upward. My voice cracked on the name of Brother Thomas. He carved the lectern in our scriptorium with his bare hands. I still trace the patterns when I pass it, the entwined vines, the carved sparrows. If he has become wind, I hope he travels far and gently. Enter the 11th March 1st, 1349. The thaw has begun. Drips of water tickle the stone and fall like tiny bells from the eaves. The sheep have wandered off. I did not see them go. Only empty pasture and shallow hoof prints fading in the melt. I wonder now if I was ever here, or if I too am only part of a dream someone else had in this valley. Final entry, March 18th, 1349. Today I heard the bell ring. Only once. No rope pulled. No hand reached. Yet it rang, deep and distant, as if from beneath the earth or beyond the sky. I took it as a summons. I will leave this journal beneath the altar. If you find it, dear reader, know this. We do not always vanish. Sometimes we simply change shape. A village becomes mist. A voice becomes wind. And a brother becomes a whisper in the rafters. I am not afraid. Amen. Brother Ailing Abbey of the Hollow Pines. They arrived just after dusk, when the sky was a bruised shade of violet and the snow had begun to fall sideways. 3 figures, cloaked, gloved, hunched slightly beneath the weight of travel, appeared at the edge of the pines. Their footprints, if made at all, vanished behind them. No one saw them enter. No one saw them knock, but the chapel doors creaked open nonetheless. Inside, the candlelight flickered faintly, and the air held the smell of old wood and stone that remembered warmth. The smallest of the 3, a girl no older than 12, stepped forward and placed something on the altar. It was a smooth stone, black as soot and warm to the touch. It pulsed once, then stopped. The eldest among them, a tall woman with snow-caked braids, raised her head and whispered, "He's still here," just quieter than before. They were not pilgrims, though they wore the dust of the road. They were not monks, nor noble, nor beggars. They were ... observers. Each year, as part of an ancient practice now forgotten by all but a few, they visited places that had begun to slip, places where memory no longer held tight, where stories frayed at the edges and time began to dissolve like salt in water. The village of the Hollow Pines was one such place. It had not died in fire, nor war, nor plague. It had simply ... loosened. The people faded like names on wet parchment. The fields grew quieter. The bells ceased to ring. Even the birds had forgotten its name, but the visitors had not. The woman spoke first, her voice soft and deliberate. We are here to witness, to record, to bless what still breathes. She knelt and touched the chapel's stone floor. Beneath her gloved palm, she felt faint warmth. Not heat, but the memory of it. The child wandered toward the great stained glass window behind the altar. Much of it had dulled with time, but one fragment, a piece depicting Saint Amaro, the patron of lost things, still shimmered faintly with color. She's smiling, the girl said. She always does in places like this, murmured the 3rd visitor, a man with ink-stained fingertips and eyes like winter skies. He was the scribe. From beneath his cloak he drew a worn leather book, its spine cracked, its pages dense with languages both known and forgotten. He began to write. Entry. Hollow Pines. Final phase. Observed entry. March 20th, 1349 state. Near dissolution. Residual echoes. Hi. Lingering presence. Brother Alling, devotional anchor. He looked around the chapel and paused. The air shimmered faintly, as though it were not air at all, but a curtain of threadbare silk. In the corner, a cloister window fogged and cleared, then fogged again. Shadows passed just beyond the glass, though no one walked outside. The scribe wrote, memory loops detected, location beginning to shed sequence, objects no longer fixed to linear time. The woman turned to him. Will you mark it ready? He hesitated. Not yet. There's still a tether. Something holds. Someone watches. That night, the three visitors stayed in the bell tower. From above, the village lay quiet, its outlines barely visible beneath moonlight and snow. A wind had picked up, not cold, but curious, curling through the broken chimneys and overgrown gardens. The girl, who never spoke much, stood near the window and whispered, I saw someone in the mirror. Her companions looked up. Describe them, the woman said. A monk, she replied. He smiled, and he said, Thank you for remembering. They exchanged glances. It was not the first time the watchers had been seen by those they observed, and it was always the last tether, the final echo before a place let go entirely. In the morning, they walked through the village. The homes stood like empty shells, not decayed, not broken, just ... paused, still holding the shape of life without the breath. A plate remained set on a table, a cloak hung by the door. A cat slept beneath a chair, unmoving, though it was made of shadow and dissolved when the girl touched it. The woman placed her hands on the well's rim and whispered a blessing in a forgotten tongue. The water below responded with a single ripple. The scribe opened his book once more. Final anchor weakened. Sight prepared for gentle release. Echo presence fading. Memory state ready. He looked toward the chapel. Brother Alling will not remain long, he said, but he will not vanish, only shift. They gathered at the altar once more before departing. The girl retrieved her black stone, now cool and silent, and placed it back inside her satchel. The woman left behind a feather, white as mist and impossibly light. She placed it between the pages of Brother Elaine's journal, which still lay beneath the altar, undisturbed by snow or time. The scribe folded his book, tucked it beneath his cloak, and looked back one final time. It is not death, he said. It is return. And with that they left, not by road, not by path, but as wind leaves a valley, unseen, unfollowed, and absolutely certain in its going. Later that year, a traveling shepherd passed near the hollow pines. He paused as something in the air tugged gently at his coat. A whisper, maybe, a scent, a silence. He saw no buildings, no chapel, no homes, only trees. Pines, tall and hollow, swaying as though listening to something beneath the earth. For a moment he thought he heard a bell. He stood still, and then he walked on. Before names had weight and roads had endings, before maps were sewn and kings cast their long shadows across the hills, there was a wind. It curled through the high valleys like a forgotten hymn. It knew no borders. It whispered into hollows and stones, carrying with it seeds, dreams, and the scent of things not yet born. Some said it came from the north, where the stars bent lower. Others believed it was older than direction, older even than time. It found the hollow, the place between ridges where pines grew with silence in their bones. Where snow did not fall, it landed as though returning home, and that is where the village would someday be, but not yet. Long before Brother Alling, long before the chapel, there was a woman with frost in her lungs and stories in her eyes. Her name was not kept, only remembered in the way the trees leaned when she passed, and the way animals did not fear her. She was called by many names, the pale root, she who sings in sleep, Amari. She did not build the village, she dreamed it. They say she laid down one winter beneath a crooked pine and whispered her final breath into the earth. And from that spot, that exact frozen imprint, warmth rose through the soil like steam from spring water. 3 nights later, the first stones arranged themselves in a circle. A circle became a hearth, and a hearth became a home. People came not because they sought shelter, but because they had dreamed of this place, though they never knew how or why. And so the hollow pines began. No charter, no war, no founding king, just arrival, wordless and welcome. It was a village born from silence, and it thrived not through growth, but stillness. The first generations kept no records. They passed knowledge through touch, the way a hand pressed to wood could teach you its age, or how listening to a well at night could tell you how deep your sorrow ran. Children did not cry when born here. They sighed as if relieved to return. And every winter, on the longest night of the year, the snow would fall in spirals, upward, not downward, lifting toward the sky like sparks from a fire. This was the signal that she had returned. It was said that Amari's spirit had never left. She lived in the spaces between stories, in the hush before a fire crackled, or in the moment a candle flickered without breeze. Midwives taught her lullabies. Carpenters left her a wooden spoon on their shelves. Even the wolves who roamed the northern forest left her offerings, feathers, bones, ice-glass stones. But no one ever claimed to see her, except once. It was during the 7th winter, when the snow had stopped falling altogether. The sky remained bare for months. The crops hardened. The ground would not open to the dead. The village gathered at the center circle, now grown to house nearly 100, and the oldest among them, a man named Corwin, spoke aloud. "She has gone. We are alone." But just as he spoke, a little girl stepped forward. She was no one's child, not known, not fed, not counted among the houses. She had silver eyes and wore a shawl made of moth wings. In her hands she held a pinnacone, perfectly preserved and warm to the touch. She placed it on the snowless ground, and within minutes frost bloomed outward in a spiral, reaching each house like a blessing. The snow returned that night. So did the dreams. The girl was never seen again. From that winter forward, the people of Hollow Pines never doubted the unseen. They left bread on doorsteps for shadows that wandered kindly. They sang to the roots before planting. They whispered their regrets into jars, then buried them at dawn. And in every generation, there was one child who listened deeper than the rest. A seer they were called, not for the future, but for what was already there, just beneath the surface of seeing. These children were not trained. They were simply understood. They would grow quietly, often in solitude, speaking to wind and water, laughing at things others could not perceive. And then, one day, without fanfare or farewell, they would walk into the pines and vanish. But the village always felt their absence like a thread gently snapped. Years passed. Decades softened the edges of memory. A chapel rose not because the people needed salvation, but because they wanted to house their silence somewhere sacred. Brother Ealing would one day come. He would record and write and keep. He would love the village in words. But the truth of Hollow Pines had always lived outside of language. It was not a place. It was a remembering. And so when the final winter came, the one that would begin the village as slow dissolving, no one fought it. The people felt it, the way trees feel snow before it falls. They prepared no defense, only reverence. They visited each home one last time, lighting every hearth. They rang the chapel bell at dusk and again at dawn. They stood in the center circle and waited, not for a rescue, but for a return. They say the final snow did not fall. It rose, softly, slowly, lifting upward like a sigh. The village shimmered, flickered, and bent like heat light. And then only the pines remained, tall, hollow, still whispering. And if you listen, truly listen, beneath the wind and through the frost, you might still hear her, Amari, or the memory of her, humming something older than words, older than sleep. Long after the first snow fell upward, after Amari's breath had scattered into pine needles and frost-covered windows, after the last seer vanished into the trees, never to be followed, a boy was born beneath silence. His name was Iron, and he never cried, not once, not when he was born in the still hour between dusk and dark, not when the midwife cut the cord with a blade dulled from ritual, not even when they placed him in the crib that had belonged to 3 dreamers before him, all of whom had wandered into the forest and left no tracks behind. He simply blinked, eyes wide, listening. From the moment he could walk, he would slip away from the other children, down to the lowest point of the village, the back of the chapel, where the stones curved strangely, as though hiding something. No one told him to go there. No one knew he did. Yet every afternoon, when the sky turned that particular color between pearl and ash, he would press his ear to the ground, to a single cold stone whose edges hummed with something not quite sound. And he would listen. The villagers noticed, not his absence, but the way his eyes lingered too long on quiet things. The way he never asked questions, not because he had no curiosity, but because he already seemed to know. Iron was not a strange child. He was a still child, still in movement, still in voice, still in heart. It made the animals trust him. It made the wind pause when passing. But it also made the chapel shiver. You see, beneath the chapel was something older than faith, older than brick or prayer or even song. It had no name, because to name it would give it form, and to give it form would let it speak. The earliest villagers, those who wandered here in Amari's dreaming, had buried it deep behind layers of carved stone and sealed circles of salt, not because it was evil, but because it was hungry, hungry for memory, hungry for grief, hungry for the warm breath of those who remembered pain too clearly. And Iron remembered too much. He began to speak less as the winters passed, not out of shyness, but reverence. He had started to hear the echoes beneath the stone. They didn't speak in words, not directly. They sang in forgotten voices, voices of villagers who had disappeared, not into death, but into silence, the ones who were too heavy with sorrow to stay above ground, and so the village buried their names, not their bodies, not their stories, just their names, because sometimes to name a grief is to trap it forever in your mouth. Hiram began carving. Not art, not scripture. He carved symbols into the base of the chapel wall, ones that no one else could read, not even Brother Alling. Each mark was a memory, a snow that never melted, a candle that flickered in reverse, a wolf that wept beneath a bloodless moon, and beneath each symbol a small circle, hollow, like an eye closed in sleep. One night on the eve of the hollow wind, when every house in the village burned a lantern to guide lost souls, Hiram did not go home. He waited until the last light went out, waited until even the stars turned away, and then he returned to the chapel, not the chapel above, the one beneath. There was a stair, hidden behind the pulpit, beneath a wooden panel polished by 300 years of kneeling. Hiram lifted it like lifting the lid of a lullaby long forgotten. Each step downward felt like falling into a heartbeat. Thump, 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 and then stillness. The snow had come early that year, not drifting, not dancing, but falling heavy, as if it carried the weight of something old. The baker's cottage, usually warm with cinnamon and firelight, had gone strangely quiet. The chimney, once a plume of sweet comfort, now rose cold into a gray sky, untouched by heat for nearly 3 days. Nobody knocked, not because they didn't notice, but because in hollow pines some silences are respected, especially when they arrive with frost on their heels. It was the miller's daughter, Lisa, who finally dared enter. She didn't mean to disturb anything. She came only to return a wooden tray the baker had lent her mother. But when she stepped inside, the smell was not of old bread or sugar. It was of pine resin and paper, old sealed paper. There was no sign of the baker. The kettle sat full, but untouched. The cat, a silent shadow, blinked once from the window-sill and leapt down the moment Lisa entered. But beneath the floorboards, under a loose plank just behind the hearth, she found it, a chest, locked not with iron, but with wax. 7 wax seals, each a different color, each stamped with a symbol she didn't recognize, and beside it a single note written in perfect, steady script. If you are not dreaming, you must not read, but if you are, begin with the blue seal. She opened the blue seal. Inside, a letter. No date, no signature, just words. To the one who finds this first, I write to you from a season that has not yet arrived. I do not know your name, but I know your breath. You hum in your sleep. You tap 3 times when nervous. You believe the snow is listening. You're correct. What you are about to read may not yet be true, but it will be, unless you forget it. Lisa sat back. This was not a game, not a prank. The writing felt too intimate, as if it had been meant for her, and yet not. She opened the next letter, the red seal. This one was different. Why do you keep sending these, knowing I won't read them? You've always written too much. You believe in cause and effect like it's a recipe, but you forget. Memory is a circle, not a line, and your hands are always cold when you write. Stop trying to save what was never lost. Now it was a conversation. 2 voices, one reaching forward, one circling back. Lisa, drawn into the rhythm, opened another, green. The mirror broke. I told you it would. The boy said his name. The pines bowed. You weren't there, but you felt it. That shaking, that silence. It wasn't fear. It was the earth remembering something it had buried. You must not forget the winter of 1348. It matters. Even if no one recalls why, her fingers trembled. These were not letters. They were warnings disguised as whispers. She went on, purple, silver, black, each with its own shade of voice. One calm, one skeptical, one almost mocking. But the final seal, white, was blank. No words, only a folded drawing. A map, but not of land. A map of sound. Circles, lines, waves, drawn in a spiral leading toward a single word in the center. Beneath, and beside it, smaller. You've been hearing it in your sleep. The 3 notes. The song you hum but don't know. It's not a lullaby. It's a key. Lisa looked up. The cat had returned. Its eyes fixed not on her, but on the hearth. Something behind it. She leaned forward, and noticed, for the first time, a carving in the bricks. 3 curved lines, musical, delicate. She hummed, softly, the tune she always found herself singing before sleep. And the hearth shifted, not visibly, but audibly. A click, a sigh. Then the soft sound of dripping water behind the wall. She didn't open it that day. She didn't dare. But she replaced the letters, resealed the chest with wax from the candle beside the window, and wrote her own note. If you are dreaming, read this slowly. If you are not, go back to sleep. We are not alone in this memory. That night, the snow outside the cottage turned blue, not from moonlight, but from something older, something listening. In the heart of hollow pines stood a crooked little apothecary. Its shelves were lined with forgotten herbs, faded labels, and glass jars that held shadows of colors long extinct. The smell inside was both calming and complex, lavender and dust, time and something you couldn't quite name, like pages that had seen too much. But it wasn't the bottles or the remedies that people whispered about. It was the attic. The stairs to the attic were sealed behind an iron-banded door with no lock and no handle. Only a tiny engraving that read, "Reflections take time, and sometimes time takes reflections." Most believed it was just poetic nonsense. Most never went near it. But Miriam, 12 years old, quiet as dusk, with hair that curled like ivy, had always felt drawn to the top of the stairs. She didn't know why. She only knew that when she stood on the landing, her ears rang with a sound like slow water over stone. And sometimes her reflection blinked twice when she only blinked once. One rain-soft evening, the apothecary's old cat leapt into Miriam's lap with something odd in its mouth, a key. Not a normal key. This one was flat, made of wood, carved with runes that pulsed faintly, like fireflies trapped in grain. When Miriam pressed it against the iron-banded door, it made no sound, but the door sighed open, not outward, not inward, just vanished. The attic smelled of moths and memory. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Dust danced in thin golden rays, and in the far corner stood a tall, crooked mirror, but no glass, just a shimmering sheet of still air, framed in silver vines. And then Miriam saw it, herself, but not as she was now, older, 17, wearing a green ribbon she didn't own yet. Eyes deeper, sadder, wiser, she reached out. The reflection reached too, but not in time. The delay was seconds long. Miriam gasped. The image changed. Now she was younger, a toddler, laughing, holding the same wooden key. Another blink. Now she was elderly, wrapped in a shawl, sitting in the same attic, mouthing words she couldn't hear. And each time the image shifted, she felt a sensation deep in her chest. Not fear, not wonder, but the eerie calm of being watched by a version of herself that remembered her. On the wall beside the mirror was a phrase scrawled in coal. This glass does not reflect who you are, only when you are. Behind her, the attic door closed. She turned, it was gone. The room grew quiet, then began to hum. A soft tune. 3 notes. The same 3 from the baker's letters. The song the village forgot, but kept singing in its sleep. Miriam sat down, cross-legged, palms on the wood floor, breathing softly. Each breath brought a new version of her in the mirror. At 15, crying. At 20, laughing. At 30, asleep. At 60, alone but smiling. Each flicker passed like a candle blown out in the dark, and slowly time stopped mattering. She closed her eyes. And when she opened them again, she wasn't in the attic. Not exactly. She was looking into it, from the mirror's side. Now the room was quiet. Dust still danced. The cat still waited at the door, and in front of the mirror stood a little girl, but not her. Someone else. Someone new, watching. Reflections take time, the mirror whispered again, but time sometimes leaves reflections behind. Every village has a child who's just a bit different. Not strange, not wrong, just tuned to a quieter frequency. In Hollow Pines, that child was Elias. He didn't speak much, didn't run, didn't shout. But every evening, just before the sun sank behind the hills, Elias walked out with a notebook. Thin, worn, full of drawings, not of people, not of buildings, but of shadows. He was the boy who mapped where the dark fell. He never explained why, not even to his grandmother, who raised him in a house that always smelled of lemon peel and old books. But he took it seriously. He'd watch as sunlight stretched across the cobblestone streets, tracing where shadows slipped, behind wells, across rooftops, under carriages and door frames. Then he'd draw, with a charcoal pencil so worn it had no paper wrapper left. Page after page, every line placed with care, and in the top corner of each page the same mark, the alchemical symbol for earth. He always said it helped him keep the ground steady. The villagers watched him with quiet fondness. He wasn't a bother. He wasn't loud, but some noticed something odd. Whenever a new structure was built, a stall, a fence, a bench, Elias would pause, tilt his head, then return the next night and erase that part of his map. When asked why, he'd reply softly, "The new shadow doesn't like the others. It moves wrong." No one pressed further. He was just a boy, after all. Children imagine things, don't they? One October evening, something changed. The sun dipped low. Elias set out with his notebook, but that night he didn't start from the village square. He began from behind the blacksmith's shop, a place he usually avoided. When his grandmother asked why, he simply said, "There's a shadow there now, but nothing's casting it." The next morning he didn't speak, he only drew. His map for that night was different. No lines, just a spiral. Tight, dark, scratched so hard into the page it almost tore through. At the center, a small eye. Below it, it counted me back. The days that followed were restless. Elias stopped walking his usual route. He no longer left the house. Instead, he sat by the window, watching, only watching. And at dusk he whispered numbers, not aloud, just under his breath, faster each night, as if counting something chasing him. Then, one evening, his grandmother found the notebook on the kitchen table. The charcoal was broken in half, the pages torn. On the last sheet was a final map, hollow pines perfectly drawn, but empty, no houses, no names, no people, just shadows everywhere, sprawling, twisting, moving toward the center. And in that center, written in crooked letters, there is a shadow that does not follow light, it follows memory. Elias was gone by morning. No trace, no footprints. Only his scarf lay gently across the well's edge, still warm, like he'd left just moments before. Some say he walked into his own map. Some say the shadows finally caught up. But sometimes on windless nights, when the moon is thin and the lanterns flicker just a little too long, villagers swear they see a boy in the distance, standing still, watching, holding a notebook that glows faintly in the dark. And if you follow the shadow beneath his feet, you'll find it doesn't stretch behind him. It stretches toward you. Near the northern edge of hollow pines, where the land begins to dip into mist and marsh, lies an orchard. It is not marked on any map. No sign points to it, and yet it has always been there. The elders say it began with a single tree, a twisted, dark-barked creature that stood alone during the winter of 1302. No one had planted it. No one claimed it. But it bloomed anyway, with flowers the color of ash and fruit that glowed faintly, like something once lost, now trying to be remembered. By 1340, the tree had multiplied, first into 3, then into 12. By 1348, there were exactly 39 trees, not one more, not one less. Each tree bore fruit once a year, on the longest night, the winter solstice. Small, dusky orbs, sweet in scent, but strange in taste, as if flavored with memory itself. But the orchard had rules. Rules never written down, only whispered. If you picked a fruit before midnight, it would rot in your hands. If you picked one without remembering a name, it would disappear the moment you bit in. And if you picked 2, just 2, you would forget your own name in return. Still, each year on the solstice the villagers came. Not all, not even many, just those who had someone they didn't want to forget. They'd walk in silence, clutching the name in their hearts, a name whispered, a name lost. They'd reach out, pluck a single fruit, and eat it slowly, eyes closed. And in that moment, for a breath, for a blink, the lost one returned. Not in body, but in feeling, a scent, a laugh, a warmth behind the eyes, gone by dawn, but real, in a way no one questioned. Brother Alling once wrote, I watched a mother eat for the son she'd buried. When she finished, she smiled through tears. Then she kissed the tree and said, that was enough. Not all were so fortunate. One year a man arrived who had no names left. His mind was fogged by age, and though he felt he had forgotten something, or someone, he could not recall who. Still he picked a fruit. It crumbled to ash in his palm. He wept, not because he lost the name again, but because he would never know if it was love or guilt or both. The orchard does not age. Its leaves remain green even in snow. Its bark grows darker, but never withers. And those who visit swear the trees whisper as the wind passes through, not in voices, but in names, quick, fleeting, gone the moment you try to listen too hard. Some say the orchard is not rooted in earth, but in remembrance. Some say the trees grow from memory itself, that each trunk is a spine, each branch a reaching hand. But one thing is certain. When the snow falls soft on hollow pines, and the air turns blue with night, the orchard waits for a name, for a whisper, for someone who still remembers. On the edge of hollow pines, nestled between two ridges where the sun rarely reached, there stood a small stone hut, circular, windowless, and ancient. It looked as though it had grown from the earth itself. Few knew who lived there. Fewer still dared to visit. And yet, a warm, flickering light always burned from its chimney. That light belonged to the quiet lantern, and the woman who kept it, the one they called Mela, was neither nun nor witch nor widow, though she dressed in all black and wore her white hair in a long, loose braid. She was simply known as the Keeper. Mela had lived in Hollow Pines longer than anyone could remember. Even Brother Alling, in his earliest journals, referred to her not as a girl, but as a presence, the lantern woman who hums like dusk. She never came to town. She never traded. And yet, when the fog thickened too much, when the roads vanished beneath snow, when the world outside turned strange and haunted, her lantern appeared, floating in the distance, moving slowly, steadily, guiding. Those who followed it always returned home, even if they were miles off course. Children lost in the forest, travelers trapped in sudden storms, widows who wandered too far in their grief. The lantern always led them back, but there was a price, one that was never demanded, only understood. If Mela saved your life, you could never speak of it aloud. You could write it down, sing it quietly to a sleeping child, even whisper it into the fire, but never speak it boldly in daylight, not in pride, not in story, not in thanks, because the quiet lantern only worked for those who respected silence. Many tried to learn how it worked. Some claimed it was magic. Others believed it was merely kindness wrapped in ritual. But one thing made it clear: Mela was more than just a woman with a lamp. The lantern moved on its own. More than once it was seen bobbing down the mountain path with no hand beneath it. Other times it rose gently into the trees before vanishing like a star. And always the air around it shimmered, not with heat, but with something softer, like a memory trying to take shape. Brother Alling once asked Mela, very gently, how the lantern found the lost. She only smiled and said, "It listens to the ones who call for help, but never expect an answer." Over the years, fewer and fewer people saw the light, not because Mela stopped guiding, but because fewer knew how to wait in silence. In time, her hut crumbled. Her braid was found wrapped around the base of an old tree, left there, tied like a ribbon, and her lantern, still seen once a year near the longest night, moving slowly through the pines. Never too close, never too far, just enough for those who still remember how to listen. Some say the lantern's glow is not fire, but hope. Some say Mela never died. She simply became light. Whatever the truth may be, when the snow begins to fall and Hollow Pine sinks into slumber, children are told, if you ever lose your way, don't shout, don't run. Just wait, close your eyes, and follow the quiet light. In the center of Hollow Pines stood a library that no one could quite remember building. It was small, only one room, with dark beams, uneven stone walls, and a single crooked tower that leaned slightly to the right, like it was listening to something far off. It had no name carved above the door, no hours listed, no lantern to light the way, and yet every few years someone would find it, often by accident, always alone. Inside, the shelves were mismatched and handmade, thick wood, some bowed with age, others carved with unfamiliar letters. There were no candles, no fire, no lamps, and yet the room was always lit, not by any flame, but by the books themselves. They glowed faintly, gently, a soft blue, like moonlight on snow. And though the library was silent, it never felt still. The air seemed to hum, pages rustled softly, spines adjusted themselves on the shelf like creatures stretching in sleep. It was said that one book in this library, a single ancient volume with a spine made of silk and bone, did not contain a story you could read. It contained yours. The book that Read the Reader had no title, no table of contents, no author. Its cover felt warm to the touch, like something living. And when you opened it, you would never see words, not right away. Instead, the page would remain blank until you thought of something important, a memory, a regret, a name you missed. And slowly, in delicate handwritten ink, the book would begin to write. Not what you said, not what you remembered, but what you felt. Moments you'd forgotten, secrets you never shared, versions of yourself you had buried under years of trying to be someone else. And as you read, it was as though the book wasn't showing you your life, but your soul. Some left laughing, some left in tears. Some returned again and again, hoping to change the pages, to see a different ending. But the book never changed, because it never lied. It was not a magic book. It was not cursed. It simply understood. Brother Alling wrote that when he opened the book, it showed him his mother's final smile, one he had never actually seen because he'd been too young to remember. Others claimed it wrote whole chapters of dreams they had never told anyone, dreams they believed were meaningless, until the book tied them into a beautiful and complete truth. No one knew how the book worked, but it was said, the more willing you were to be known, the more the book revealed. And for those too frightened to turn the page, it remained blank, not as punishment, but as kindness. Some things, after all, must be waited for, even by a book. And then one day, the book vanished. Only the shelf where it had sat remained slightly warmer than the rest. Brother Alling returned often, but he never found it again, though in one final journal entry he wrote, "Sometimes when I pass a mirror, I swear I see words in my eyes." So now the villagers say, if you ever feel like something is watching over you with deep, silent love, perhaps the book has returned, and perhaps it is still reading. At the edge of hollow pines, where the river bends like a sleeping cat, there was once a house with 7 rooms. Each room had its own purpose, one for cooking, one for reading, one for dreaming, and so on. But the 7th room, the one at the top of the narrow stairs behind the green door, was different. It didn't stay the same. One day it might be a nursery, the next a quiet study, then a winter garden with misted windows and frost on the floor. Brother Alling once visited and found it filled with sand, glowing softly as if lit by a sun that wasn't there. A child who lived in the house swore it once turned into a boat, and an old woman claimed the room became her childhood kitchen, even though she had never told anyone what it looked like. But here was the strangest part. The room never changed when someone was watching, only when the door was closed, and the moment you stepped inside again, it would be something new. Some believed the room was haunted. Others believed it was lonely. But Brother Alling believed something different. He wrote, "I think the room is alive, not in body, but in memory. It listens, it feels. It reflects not what we want, but what we need to see. For those grieving, it became a space of peace. For those hiding, it became a room of mirrors. For those lost, it showed a door that didn't exist anywhere else." Once a traveler stayed in the house for just one night. They entered the seventh room, and when they returned the next morning, they looked different, calmer, softer. They never spoke of what they saw, but before they left, they wrote a single note on the windowsill. "Thank you for remembering what I had forgotten." Eventually, the house grew old. The family moved on. The shutters fell. The roof gave in. And yet the green door never aged. Its paint never cracked. Its knob never rusted. Even now, if you pass by the ruins of that house, you'll see it standing, quietly, as if waiting for someone brave enough to open it again. They say if your heart is too heavy and your dreams too tangled, that room may still shift for you, but only if you close the door and wait. On the northern slope of hollow pines, just beyond the crooked elm and the moss-covered stones, there is a place where the wind never sounds the same twice. To most, it's just a patch of trees, a grove like any other. But those who've stood there long enough, they'll tell you something else. They'll tell you the wind there speaks, not in howls, not in whistles, but in names. The villagers called it the Whispering Hollow. At first it was a curiosity. People would walk through the grove and swear they heard soft sounds. Leora, Joan, Tess. Names they didn't recognize, or worse, names they did. An old man once heard his wife's name, though she'd passed 10 winters ago. A child heard the name of their grandfather, whom they'd never met. And once Brother Alling visited during an evening fog and heard a name he had never spoken aloud, not since he was a boy. He stood still for hours, listening, and when he returned to the abbey, he wrote only, "The wind does not invent, it recalls." Some believed the names were those of people lost to time, forgotten villagers, wandering souls. Others believed they were memories themselves, caught in the air like dust. The Whispering Hollow became sacred, a place for grief and sometimes for forgiveness. People began to visit at night, not to speak, but to listen. They would sit beneath the trees, wrap themselves in thick shawls, and wait. And then the wind would arrive, not cold, not cruel, just insistent. It would rattle the branches gently, twirl around your ankles, slip past your ears like a silk ribbon, and in that moment, you might hear it, your name, someone else's, a name you hadn't thought of in years, but it was never loud, never repeated, never asked anything of you, just a whisper soft enough to make you question whether you heard anything at all. Some villagers claimed the wind responded to emotion, that if you brought sorrow, you would hear the name of someone who once made you smile, that if you brought guilt, you'd hear a name you still owed something to, and if you brought love, the wind might not speak at all, but instead wrap around you like a blanket. One winter, the grove fell silent for 3 weeks. No wind, no sound. People feared it had died. But then a child wandered in with a broken toy and a tear-streaked face, and the wind returned, gently, warmly, speaking the child's own name, as if to comfort. From then on, they said the wind had a favorite, anyone who came seeking peace, not answers. Today the whispering hollow is easy to miss. The trees look ordinary, the ground is uneven. But if you sit and breathe and let your mind become still, the wind might still find you and remind you gently that you are remembered, even if you've forgotten yourself. At the far end of Hollow Pines, where the creek curves like a crooked smile, there once lived a man named Tumorin, though the children simply called him Pebble Tom. He lived alone in a cottage shaped like a teacup, its roof mossy and low, and its windows always fogged from the inside. He rarely spoke, but each morning, just as the sky turned gray-blue, he would walk to the edge of the water with a small leather pouch in hand. Inside, pebbles, all the same size, all the same weight, each perfectly smooth and warm from his pocket. And every day, without fail, Tumorin would place one pebble into a wooden bowl carved into the creekside stone. He did it with reverence, as if the world itself depended on it. No one knew why, no one dared ask, but the bowl slowly filled, year by year, stone by stone. People guessed. They said it was how he counted the seasons, or how he tracked something only he understood, a memory perhaps, or a promise he made long ago. Children used to sneak up and watch from behind the reeds. He never acknowledged them, but once a curious boy whispered, "Why pebbles, not a clock?" Tumorin didn't turn, didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply replied, "Clocks tick to forget, pebbles sit to remember." The boy never forgot that, and he never asked again. One spring the creek flooded. The water rose high. When it receded, the bowl was empty. Every single pebble gone. The villagers braced for grief. They thought Tumorin would fall apart. But when he returned to the bowl and saw it empty, he only nodded. Then he reached into his pouch and placed a single pebble back in. Some say the flood was the moment he was waiting for, the reason for the counting. Others believed it was just water, and he had started again because that's what time does. It returns. But the truth came later, quietly, after Tumorin passed, peacefully, in his sleep. The village found a book hidden beneath the floorboards of his cottage. No title, no name, only page after page of dates, sketched maps, scribbles, and weather patterns. And beside each day, a small drawing of a pebble, but every 100th pebble had a name next to it. Names of people long gone, villagers who had died, some who had vanished, some who had been forgotten by everyone else except Tumorin. It turned out he wasn't measuring his time. He was marking theirs. Pebbles for remembrance, pebbles for grief, pebbles for celebration, a quiet ritual for those the world had let go of. Now, if you walk by the creek, you'll see a new bowl. This one carved deeper, wider, and in it a scattering of pebbles left by others. Some bring stones from far away. Some write names on them. Others leave them blank, letting the stones speak for them. It's become a quiet tradition. No ceremony, no signs, no words. Just weight, memory, and the soft sound of water passing by. There was a room in Hollow Pines no one could quite explain, not because it was secret or magical or forbidden, but because it changed. It sat above the old tailor's shop, tucked between two crooked chimneys. By day it looked like any other attic, narrow beams, creaky floorboards, dust motes spinning in sunlight. But at night, something shifted. People who stayed there overnight, traveling merchants, Wandering artists, the occasional lost relative reported strange things. One said the room stretched, not in a dream, in reality. She claimed she walked 5 steps to the window in the evening, and 20 to reach it again by dawn. Another said the ceiling lowered as he fell asleep, then rose again by morning. He woke with the scent of lavender and a blanket tucked under his chin, one he brought. An old herbalist once sketched the room after a single night. What she drew didn't match what she had entered. Her drawing showed a spiral-shaped space with no corners, as if the walls had curled in on themselves like a nautilus shell. She left the village the next day and never spoke of it again. But the strangest story came from a mute boy who stayed there during a summer storm. He couldn't explain with words, so he painted 4 paintings, each showing the room in a different shape, a library of endless shelves, a forest clearing lit by floating lanterns, a narrow train car filled with ghostly passengers, and finally, a cradle swaying gently in a starless sky. The villagers hung the paintings in the town hall. Some say if you stare at them long enough, the shapes begin to shift again. No one knows why the room changes. Or if it actually does, perhaps it only bends to the sleeper's needs, their grief, their longing, their deepest memory or dream. One traveler, an insomniac with eyes like smoke, said it best. It's the only place I've ever slept through the night. Not because it was quiet, but because it knew who I was and it made room for me. Today, the attic still exists. The tailor's shop is gone, the stairs are blocked, and the window is nailed shut. But sometimes, on especially foggy nights, villagers say they see a soft glow from above, as if the room is still reshaping itself, still listening, waiting for the next soul it can hold. At the northern edge of Hollow Pines, past the crooked bridge and behind the overgrown chapel, stood an oak tree unlike any other, its trunk twisted like a ribbon, its bark bore patterns like script, not carved, not scratched, grown that way. And though it had stood there for over 300 years, it had never gotten taller, never grown a single branch more. The villagers called it the Whispering Oak. Children swore it hummed when you pressed your ear to it. Old men claimed it knew your name if you sat beneath it long enough. And once, just once, a girl named Miriam said she heard it speak. She had been crying when she found it. She'd wandered off after a quarrel with her mother, barefoot and heartbroken, hiding her face from the world. She sat down beside the oak, knees pulled in, face red with tears, and as the wind moved gently through the leaves, she heard a voice, not loud, not clear, but soft and low, as if whispered through her very bones. You are held. You are not broken. You are remembered. Miriam froze, and then quietly she wept. Not out of fear, but relief. When she returned home, she told no one. Not for many years. Only when she was an old woman, her hair like frost and hands like parchment, did she whisper it to a younger girl, her granddaughter. That girl wrote the story in a journal. The journal was found after the girl passed, and in the margins of the page where the Whispering Oak was mentioned was a tiny, curled leaf, perfectly dried. No one could explain how it had survived. Some say the oak still whispers, but only to those in pain. Not every voice hears it. Only those who need to remember they belong. And if you visit Hollow Pines on a night when the moon is just a sliver, and you sit very still, and you let your sorrow rest without shame, You might hear it, too, not in words, but in a knowing, in the hush of something old saying, "You are not lost." On the southern slope of hollow pines, beyond the moss-covered stone path, and across a shallow stream that always ran cold, there stood a small house. But no one had ever been inside, not because it was locked, not because it was dangerous, but because simply it had no door, no visible entry, no stairs, no cracks, just 4 perfect walls, a shingled roof, and 6 misted windows, like watching eyes. The locals called it the doorless house. Every winter the snow on its roof melted more slowly than anywhere else. In the autumn no leaves ever settled at its base, and in spring violet wildflowers always bloomed beside its stone foundation. Even when the ground was still frozen, children dared each other to knock on its wooden walls, and though no one had ever heard a reply, some swore they felt warmth radiating through their palms when they touched it, like placing your hand on someone's back as they sleep. An old letter, once found in the Hollow Pines archives, was written by a woman named Tilda Hemsworth, dated 1823. She described dreams of a house with no door, where someone she loved was waiting. She wrote of walking the halls in her sleep, never seeing the face but always hearing the humming of a lullaby. The strange thing is, Tilda died in childbirth. The child survived. And decades later, her granddaughter, unaware of the letter, painted a house again and again in art school. A house with 4 walls, no door, 6 misty windows, always violet flowers beneath it. Locals who pass by today leave small things at its base, buttons, folded paper stars, acorns, or pieces of string. No one knows why. No one teaches them to, but it continues, as if the house is something sacred and watching. And once, when the mist was thickest in Hollow Pines, a traveler wandered off the main road. He came back shaken, pale, and quiet. He never said what he saw, but he did say one thing. It's not a house. It's a memory you can walk beside. Some stories don't ask you to understand them, only to stand with them. And the house with no door waits still, silent, warm, watching. It began with a drizzle, a soft mist that drifted through Hollow Pines once every few years, never on schedule, never during a season you'd expect. This rain didn't follow weather. It followed memory. Old folks said it always began the same way, a distant smell of lavender and pine smoke, and then the wind would still, not stop, not gust, just still, as if the whole world had taken a deep breath and held it. Then the mist would roll in, thin, bluish, cold, and with it came a rain so light it barely touched the ground. But it did touch things, letters hidden under floorboards, names etched into old stones, forgotten toys beneath the roots of trees, lost rings, portraits, locks of hair, unspoken words, and those who stood under it even briefly often felt something odd. A woman once stepped outside into the rain holding a broken pocket watch. It hadn't ticked in decades. By morning it chimed softly, once, and then never again. A boy no older than 8 wandered into the mist looking for his dog. He returned a few minutes later with tears in his eyes, not because he was scared, but because he said, "Grandpa said my name." The boy's grandfather had passed 3 winters before. You see, the villagers began to believe the rain was more than water, that it remembered, not just moments, but names, and for a brief time the ones who'd been forgotten could be felt again, heard again. They never tried to capture it, never bottled it, never studied it, because hollow pines knew some things are sacred only when left untouched. One year the rain came during a festival. Laughter slowed. Children looked up in wonder, and the oldest woman in the village, blind since childhood, whispered, "Eliza," that was her sister's name, gone since 1903. As the mist cleared and the blue rain faded, things returned to normal. But every now and then you'll see a stone on a window ledge, a name etched freshly into wood, a child asleep under a tree, smiling, and you'll wonder, had it rained? Or had the memory of rain returned? Hollow Pines doesn't answer questions like that. It only whispers and lets you listen. In the center of Hollow Pines, down a narrow lane where the cobblestones never stayed dry, there once lived a seamstress named Elara. Her shop was small, just one room, with a single lamp in the window and the smell of cedar in the air. She worked mostly in silence, her hands quick and precise, her eyes the color of dusk. She could stitch a torn coat in minutes, repair lace so finely you could never tell it had been broken. But her most unusual skill was one she never spoke of, because Elara didn't just mend fabric, she mended shadows. It began quietly. A child came in one autumn evening, clutching his coat, not for warmth, but because his shadow wasn't following him anymore. It stayed behind, frozen on the road, like a puddle of ink. Elara didn't seem surprised. She fetched a small silver needle, black thread so fine it was almost invisible, and asked the boy to stand very still. Then, as though sewing two pieces of cloth, she began to stitch his shadow back to his heels. When she tied the final knot, the shadow rippled once, and then followed him out the door. The boy never told anyone what happened, but others began to come. A widow whose shadow had grown too long, dragging behind her like grief. A farmer whose shadow had split in two after a storm. A woman whose shadow had turned its back to her and refused to move. Elara worked on them all. Her methods were strange. Sometimes she hummed softly. Sometimes she pricked her own finger, letting a drop of blood fall onto the shadow. Sometimes she used thread the color of moonlight. Sometimes thread so dark it seemed to swallow the lamp's glow. And always when she was finished, she'd whisper, "Stay close now." One winter she vanished. Her shop stood empty. The lamp never lit again. When villagers entered, they found no clothes, no tools, only a single folded cloth on the counter. When they opened it, they saw it wasn't cloth at all. It was a shadow, perfectly flat, perfectly still. No one knew whose it was. No one touched it. They locked the shop and left it there. Some nights, when the wind is slow and the streets are quiet, you can still see a faint glow from the seamstress's window, and if you walk too close, your own shadow might stretch toward it, as if it remembers her hands. Near the edge of Hollow Pines, where the ground dips into a frost-bitten hollow, there is a single gravestone that never ices over. Even in the deepest winter, when snow buries the roofs and the river freezes so solid you can walk across it, this grave remains bare and blooming. Every December, violet flowers rise from the frozen earth around it. Not frost-resistant weeds, not winter berries, but full blossoms, delicate and fragrant, their petals trembling in the chill. No one knows how. The stone itself is simple. Leora Ansel, 1843 to 1867. No epitaph. no family name beyond her own. The story, as told by the oldest villagers, goes like this. Leora was a healer, but not in the way the doctors were. She worked with roots, with steam, with whispers and patience. She sat beside the sick for hours, her hands warm, her voice low, telling stories until they could sleep. One winter, a fever swept through hollow pines. Leora went house to house, tending the ill. By the time the fever passed, she had saved dozens, but not herself. The village buried her in the frost hollow, the ground so hard they had to pour boiling water to dig deep enough. And the next morning, there they were, the flowers. People called it a miracle. Some believed they grew from seeds hidden in her dress. Others believed her warmth was too stubborn to leave the earth. From then on, the grave became a place for wishes. Not loud prayers, not offerings, just quiet moments. People would kneel, breathe against the cold, and tell Leora what they couldn't tell anyone else. It's said that if you stand there long enough, the petals sway in a rhythm that doesn't match the wind, almost like breathing, almost like listening. And once, only once, a child claimed to hear a voice beneath the snow. Rest, I'll keep watch. Every few years, strangers arrive in hollow pines in the dead of winter, searching for it. No one knows how they've heard of the grave. No one asks. The villagers simply point the way. And when those strangers return, their faces are softer, their eyes less heavy. Perhaps it's the flowers. Perhaps it's the story. Or perhaps it's just a reminder that even in the coldest ground, something warm can still take root. On the winding road into hollow pines, there stands an old iron post with a lantern at its top. The paint is flaked, the base is half swallowed by moss, and the glass panes are clouded with age. But the flame inside has never gone out. Not once. Not in storms, not in floods. Not even in the blizzard of 1891, when every fire in the village froze and died. The villagers call it the Watcher's Light. No one knows who first lit it. The earliest mention appears in a travel journal from 1780, where a passing merchant wrote, "Approaching hollow pines, in the dark I saw a lantern ahead. I thought it must be the gate to the inn. But when I arrived, it was only a post, and no one near it." Yet the flame burned bright as if just fed. Over the years, people noticed something peculiar. Those who arrived at the lantern late at night often reported a strange calm. They'd walk the last stretch into the village feeling lighter, as though they had been carrying something heavy they no longer needed. One winter, a soldier returned from war and stopped at the lantern. He placed his hand on the cold iron, and when he stepped away, he left his sword leaning against it. The next morning the sword was gone, but the lantern burned on. Some say the light guides travelers. Others say it keeps watch for those who never made it home. The strangest story comes from a young woman named Althea. She arrived in hollow pines on foot, shivering, the hem of her dress soaked with ice. When she reached the lantern, she claimed she saw someone standing beside it, a man with kind eyes holding out a hand. She blinked, and he was gone, but she still swears she felt the warmth of his palm. The villagers never clean the lantern, never refill it, never touch it, because the truth is, no one has ever seen a wick inside, just the light, always the light. And if you pass by late at night, especially in fog, you might see a faint outline standing beside it, not moving, not speaking, just watching, keeping the flame for whoever still needs it. At the far end of Hollow Pines, past the ivy-wrapped wall and through a narrow gate of rusted iron, there once stood a shop that smelled faintly of cedar oil and rain. Its windows were so dusty you could barely see inside, yet the faint ticking of dozens of clocks could always be heard if you pressed your ear to the glass. The shop belonged to August Marin, a clockmaker with quiet eyes, silver hair, and hands so steady they seemed carved from stone. But the clocks he made were not for keeping time in the way we think. No, they returned it. The first visit, the story began with a boy named Ezra, who entered the shop on a day when the sky hung heavy and gray. He carried in his hands a broken pocket watch, a gift from his grandmother, now gone. He told August, voice trembling, that it had stopped the moment she passed. August nodded, took the watch, and wound it once. When the boy opened it again, the hands had not moved forward. They had turned back. Not far, just enough to show the time his grandmother used to call him in for supper. And in that moment, Ezra swore he could smell the stew she used to make. The clocks no one asked, for over the years, strange clocks began appearing in Hollow Pines homes. A baker received one whose chime brought the scent of fresh bread from his childhood kitchen. An old woman's clock ticked in rhythm with the lullaby her mother sang decades ago. A widower's mantel clock, once a silent relic, began to strike only on the hour his wife used to return from the market. No one ever ordered these clocks. They simply appeared on doorsteps, wrapped in brown paper and string. No note, no signature. The backward hour, it was said that if you stayed in the shop when midnight struck, one clock on the far wall would begin to run backwards. The tick was slower, deeper, like footsteps fading into the distance. If you watched long enough, the shadows in the room would seem to stretch toward the corners. The air would smell faintly of old rain, and for a moment, just a moment, you could feel a memory leaning close. Some cried, some smiled, some left without a word. The last day one autumn, the ticking stopped. Every clock in the shop froze. The windows were clear for the first time in decades, but inside, the room was empty. Only a single clock remained, sitting on the counter. Its hands pointed to a time no one recognized. Its pendulum swung gently, though there was no wind, and beside it, in August's neat handwriting, was a note. Time doesn't belong to us. I only borrowed what you'd forgotten. The clock that remains. The shop is gone now, but in the library of Hollow Pines on the highest shelf sits that final clock. No one winds it. No one dares, and yet, some nights when you're the only one inside, you might hear a slow, deliberate tick from the far corner. And if you follow it, you'll find the clock's hands moving not forward, but backward, toward something you didn't realize you'd lost. It began on a windless night. Not cold, not warm, just still. The air in Hollow Pines felt different, as though the stars themselves were leaning closer, listening. Even the usual sounds, the slow creak, the swaying pines, the distant owls, seemed quieter. That night, without warning, the village slept. All at once, the baker, halfway through kneading dough. The night watchman, mid-step on the cobblestones. The innkeeper pouring tea into an empty cup. Even the blacksmith, who swore later he fell asleep with the hammer still in his hand. It wasn't sudden in the way fainting is sudden. It was gentle, like a warm tide pulling everyone into the same dream at the same time. The shared dream, they woke hours later with the same memory. Not a vague impression, not scattered fragments, but the same dream, exactly. In it, They were all standing together in the village square. The air smelled of pine needles and rain. Every window glowed with candlelight, though no flames could be seen. In the center of the square was a table made of white oak. Upon it sat 6 objects, a folded cloth that felt warm to the touch, a small glass bottle filled with rain the color of the moon, a key with no teeth, a clock without numbers, a book that hummed softly when held, and a lantern, its flame steady and impossibly bright. Each person in the dream touched one object, and when they did, they felt a memory that wasn't their own, yet fit inside them as if it had been there all along. Waking. When they awoke, no one spoke of it immediately. It was too strange, too precise. But as they went about their day, they began to notice something. They moved slower, softer, the way people move when they're not afraid of running out of time. The baker gave away an extra loaf without being asked. The blacksmith fixed a broken hinge for free. The innkeeper kept the tea hot for a traveler who hadn't yet arrived. The keeper's guess, weeks later, an old woman, the self-appointed keeper of Hollow Pine's stranger stories, made her guess. It wasn't a dream, she said. It was a gathering, somewhere not here, not there, somewhere we only reached together. And though no one could prove her right, no one tried to prove her wrong. The lantern in the square. To this day, a lantern hangs quietly in the village square. It doesn't to burn every night, only on evenings when the air feels still and the stars seem close. Some say it's a sign that the village might sleep all at once again. Others say it already has more than once, and we simply don't remember the mornings after. If you ever pass through Hollow Pines and the lantern is glowing, the best thing you can do is stop. Sit on the edge of the fountain, close your eyes, because if the tide of sleep comes for the whole village again, you might just be carried along. And when you wake, you'll know something you didn't before, something you can't explain, but will carry for the rest of your days. On the far side of Hollow Pines, past the last cottage and beyond the weathered wooden fence, there is a path that no one takes. Not because it's dangerous, not because it's forbidden, because it wasn't there. For as long as anyone could remember, the land there had been a tangle of brambles and fallen branches, thick enough that even deer avoided it. But one morning a shepherd swore he saw a narrow trail winding into the trees. The odd thing was, the trail was clean. No roots breaking the soil, no leaves scattered across it, as if it had been swept. The first step he stood at the entrance unsure. There was no sound, not the rustle of leaves, not the hum of insects, not even the distant call of the stream, just stillness. When he took his first step, the air shifted, cooler, lighter, almost as though the world ahead of him was holding its breath. The path bent gently, guiding him deeper into the forest. It didn't fork, didn't twist unexpectedly, only curved in slow, deliberate arcs, each turn revealing something quietly strange. A tree with a hollow full of dried lavender. A stone the size of a chair, warm despite the shade. A cluster of white feathers arranged in a perfect circle. He didn't take anything. He didn't touch anything. It felt wrong to disturb it. The clearing, after what felt like an hour, the path ended in a small clearing. In the center stood a single bench, carved from pale wood, facing nothing but the open air. He sat, and as he did, the sunlight changed, becoming softer, warmer, tinged with gold, though he couldn't see the sun itself. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt full of something he couldn't name. The return, when he finally stood to leave, the path seemed shorter. The entrance appeared sooner than expected, as if it had drawn him gently back. By the next morning, the brambles had returned. No sign of the trail remained. The keeper's ledger, decades later, a small leather book was found in the village archives. It listed years, with only a single entry beneath each one. The last read, the path opened again. I am ready now. The year was exactly 100 after the shepherd's walk. Some roads are not meant to be taken often. They wait, not for a traveler, but for the moment a traveler is ready. And when that moment comes, the way will open. Not a day sooner, not a day later. In the oldest house of Hollow Pines, the one with the crooked roof and ivy climbing right over the chimney, there is a single window on the top floor that opens to nothing. From the outside, it's built into the wall, framed by faded shutters. From the inside, there is no wall there at all, only the window. It hangs in the air as if the room was built around it, rather than it being part of the house. The first story, the earliest mention of it, comes from a letter written in 1824. We opened it, and there was no street, no forest, no sky, only a feeling, as though we were standing somewhere we had been before but could not remember when. Those who have opened the window say the same thing in different words. It smelled like my grandmother's kitchen. I heard the river from my childhood. I felt the air of a summer I thought I had forgotten. No one ever sees anything through it. It's not black, it's not light, it's just there. A place without shape, sound, or edge, but heavy with familiarity. The keeper's rule. The family who owned the house for generations had only one rule: never open the window twice in one lifetime. They believed the first time showed you a place you needed to remember. The second time it might try to take you there. The traveler's visit one winter. A traveler stayed in the house while passing through Hollow Pines. He was given the attic room, and of course the strange window caught his attention. That night, curiosity won. He unlatched it, and in that moment his shoulders relaxed. The lines in his face softened. His eyes glistened. When asked the next morning what he saw, he simply said, "I didn't see it." I heard her laugh again. He never explained who her was. Now the house still stands. The ivy still climbs, and the window still waits. Sometimes when the wind moves just right, the shutters creak open on their own, and for the briefest moment the air around you feels like home, even if you're far from it. If you ever find yourself there, and the window is open, you'll have to decide. Do you look? Do you listen? Or do you simply stand in the doorway and let it be? Content that some places are meant to remain almost yours, but never entirely. Downriver from Hollow Pines, where the water deepens into a slow, dark bend, there's an old tale about a bell that rings beneath the surface. No one has ever seen it. No chain, no frame, no church steeple leaning into the current. Yet on certain nights, when the moon is low and the mist hangs heavy, you can hear it. A single chime, low, clear, fading into the night like a voice calling from far away. The flood, the story says that a century ago, a small chapel stood at the bend. It was built of pale stone, its bell tower simple, but tall enough to catch the morning sun. One spring the river swelled higher than anyone had seen. For days the rain didn't stop. The ground soft, the banks crumbled, and on the fourth night the water took the chapel whole. When morning came, the steeple was gone. The bell, somewhere below the surface. The fisherman's tale. Years later, an old fisherman swore he heard the bell while rowing home at dusk. He stopped his boat and let it drift, straining to listen. It rang once, and in that sound he swore he heard the voices of those who had once prayed there, not as echoes, but as if they were still speaking, warm and alive. He never fished that bend again. Said it wasn't right to disturb a place that still had a congregation. The river's secret others have claimed the bell only rings for those carrying a question in their heart, something they've never said aloud. If you hear it, the answer will come to you in dreams that night. Not as words, but as a feeling you'll understand without needing to explain. Now the river is calm these days. Children play at its edge. Boats pass without incident. But on the stillest nights, when the air is cold enough for your breath to cloud, you might hear it, one chime, pause, silence, and in that silence something settles in you. Not an answer you can speak, just the comfort of knowing you don't have to ask anymore.